Welcome to Look, Think, Click. Last week in vlog number 4, I talked about some of the limitations of our cameras compared to the way we see with our eyes, and how having an understanding of those limitations can help us in our photography. And this vlog, I want to talk a bit more about some of those differences, but from quite a different perspective. Our eyes, the way we see, are looking constantly. We're viewing the scene continuously, more like a video than a single photograph. Whereas a single photograph is one split second, usually split second in time. It can be a little longer, it can be very short, but it's one slice of time. It's not continuous. And the way we see with our eyes is continuous. We don't see snapshots. We don't see snippets of time taken out of context. And this is essentially what our photographs are. They are snippets of time that are frozen and taken out of the context necessarily that they happened in. Today I want to talk about 5 key things that will help us take better photographs, to help us capture those instances of time, those moments in time, to create more compelling photographs. Key number 1 is timing, knowing precisely when to push the shutter release button at the decisive moment, the best time to take a photograph. Depending on what you're photographing, there'll be lots of different things happening here, but the real key is anticipation. Anticipating what will be the best time before it happens, and preferably more than a split second before it happens, so that you've got time to adjust the other settings on your camera so that everything will fall into place at the right moment. If you're photographing landscapes, most often you've got a lot more time. You've got plenty of time to make those decisions, waiting for the right light, waiting for the right season even. So anticipating the right time to make the best style of landscape photograph that you can sometimes can take days or weeks or even months to anticipate the right moment when every aspect will fall into place nicely, with the right weather, with the right lighting, with the right foliage on the trees. All of these things must be taken into consideration. If you're a sports photographer, if you're photographing a football game, your anticipation skills will need to be quite differently applied, because of course the action in a football game happens a lot more quickly than waiting for the right weather for a landscape. With a football game, if you understand the game, if you know the rules, if you know the way the teams play and the way even the players in the teams play, it will be easier to anticipate the flow of the action and know just the right moments when the most spectacular shots are going to happen, and you'll be ready for them. Now, they say that the best sports photographers only follow one game, and they know that game inside out and backwards, and it's what makes them best is because they can anticipate the action so much more easily. So whatever you're photographing, get familiar with it, get to know it, be able to anticipate the action. We often go down to the fresh markets here in Chiang Mai. All the produce, all the action in the mornings is wonderful. It's colourful, it's bustling, it's vibrant. People are smiley and friendly quite often. They're busy going about their work, if they're buying, if they're selling. And because we go down there quite frequently with our photographic workshops, we've gotten to know the feel of the market and the flow of the market. And so getting used to it and becoming familiar with it has enabled us to photograph it better, because we can anticipate the way that life continues at that market pretty much every day of the year. It's the same, but it's different. But because we're familiar with it, we can follow the flow of it more easily. We can get a feel for it and just know the right times and the right situations to get some great shots. The second key is composition, knowing what to include and what to exclude from our photographs. Our eyes see pretty wide. Our peripheral vision is vast when you think about it. I can see both my hands here. It's not the way we see and not the way we look all of the time, but that's what our brain is perceiving. This is what we're seeing. We don't often get to shoot with lenses on our cameras that can see this far apart, but it's good to be aware of what you're seeing and the way you want to compose your photographs. Because a lot of the time, we're only wanting to compose seeing this much, not this much. And it's what we choose. If we choose to look in one direction or another, or from one point of view, one perspective or another, it will determine what we're going to photograph, what we're going to see within the boundaries of our compositional framing. So thinking about that and learning to see what you find most interesting within a scene will help you become a better photographer, choosing what to include and what to exclude. And of course, with composition, there's a bunch of rules as well. There's the rule of thirds, leading lines, about diagonals, about the use of all sorts of different techniques and methods, most of which have come from the classical painting background, so they're hundreds or thousands of years old even. With photography, if we can learn to understand these rules and utilize them when they best fit, not just because they're there, then we will get some better, stronger, more interesting photographs. And a lot of times I'll hear photographic educators encourage people to learn the rules and then learn how to break them. I like to try and put it a bit of a different way. I like to encourage you to learn the rules so well that you will learn to use them intuitively, that they'll just become second nature when you're shooting. I find it quite difficult to teach composition because that's what's happened to me. I haven't necessarily sat down and learned all the rules, but I know them intuitively. I know them by second nature, and so they just happen naturally when I'm looking through my viewfinder or at my monitor. And it's good to experiment with the rules, as you can see in this portrait of the young lady with the umbrella. It's fun to mix it up and not stick to a stock standard portrait all of the time, as in with any sort of composition. Play around. These days with digital cameras, it's easy and cheap to shoot more than just 1 or 2 or 3 frames a session. Keep shooting, but each time you release the shutter, vary your composition a little bit more. Change it up and experiment so that you get a series of images from the same situation that are all a little bit different because your composition's different. One of the main things to keep in mind with composition is to try and lead your viewer's eye to the main part of the composition, to the main focus of your subject. And in doing this, you'll create stronger, more compelling images. The third key I'd like to point out is light. The way we see light, the way our cameras see light. I covered this quite extensively in the last vlog. It's just different, and the more we can be aware of this and the more we can understand it, then the better photographs we will make, because we will understand that our eyes see far broader dynamic range of tone than our cameras can record. So learning to understand the different styles of light, the different types of light. When you've got hard light, we're going to see strong, hard-edged, dark shadows. When you've got soft light, when you're working, say, under an overcast sky, you're going to see soft edge shadow or little or no shadow at all, and much more even toning on an image, because the contrast in the light is a lot lower. The dynamic range is a lot narrower when the light is softer. The style of lighting, if it's hard or if it's soft lighting, is going to have a large impact on the mood of your image and the style of your image. If you're wanting to create a gentle, soft, warm portrait, then choosing to use or choosing to shoot in a hard light is going to be very difficult to convey that feeling. Whereas if you shoot with a nice, soft, gentle light, say from a single window or on an overcast day, you're going to be able to convey that nice, warm, soft, gentle feeling much more easily. Sometimes we're able to manipulate the light by adding some flash or a reflector or using other light sources to be able to balance the light more evenly. This adds another complication to our shooting, but it can result in some wonderful images and just different dynamics if we're able to control the light. And generally trying to control the light to make it closer to how we actually see with our eyes. And related to this is the fourth thing that I'd like to talk about, and that is exposure. How much or how little of the light that we're working with is allowed to hit the sensor and create the image. This will have a big effect also on the style and the feeling of the image, the mood of the image that you're creating. If you are working particularly in a hard light where the shadows are dark, and you know how to choose to expose for the highlights or expose for the shadows or expose for the middle ground or the middle tone of the image, this is going to produce three very different styles, very different feeling and mood of an image, because you're letting more or less light hit the sensor, and therefore more or less of the image is going to be seen. For example, if you're photographing a situation where there is a strong backlight and you're exposing for the bright areas, then your subject will be quite dark. Alternatively, you can expose for the shadow areas that are falling on your subject if they're backlit, and the background will be very, very bright. You'll lose a lot of the detail, and then you'll be able to see the subject more clearly, as I've shown in these two photographs of the Samoan rider. Particularly if you're working in manual mode, you'll have a lot more control over your exposure because you are operating the ISO, you're operating the aperture, and you're operating the shutter speed to achieve the exposure that you want. If you're working in an automatic mode on your camera, then your camera is making that decision for you. When we're taking photographs, we have to make a lot of decisions about how we want to take the photograph, about the timing, about the composition, about the type of lighting we want to use, and about the exposure we want to make. There's also a lot to do with our intuition and feeling, and this is the fifth key that I want to talk about. The way we relate to our subjects, whether it's a person, whether it's a bicycle, whether it's a landscape or a boat or whatever your subject material might be, our relationship with our subject will have some effect on the way we make the photographs. I'm not hugely interested in photographing flowers, but my wife is, and because she is more interested in flowers and more passionate about it, she takes way better flower photographs than I do. When we're doing our workshops here in Chiang Mai, I generally don't teach about taking photographs of flowers. I let Pansa do it because she's much more passionate and much more interested in the subject matter than I am. And so this is how I encourage people, if you're looking to photograph something and you're not sure what you want to get into or what style you want to develop, always encourage people to photograph what you're passionate about or build a passion for something that you're interested to photograph. This way you'll get the best pictures. And if you like photographing people or even animals, the more you build a relationship with your subjects, the better photographs you'll be able to get. We've been finding this both around at the markets where we take our workshops, and also one of our favourite places to go is up at Landwer-Johan, where there is a number of different ethnic minority groups, and we get to photograph these people quite frequently, and we've built up some really lovely relationships with some of them, particularly little Malu and her mum Masu, and they are quite comfortable to be photographed and they trust us. And recently I was there just after Malu had had the rings taken off her neck. She'd been wearing them for a couple of years and she was going to be sent away to school. We just happened to arrive the morning that they'd taken them off, and I was just gentle and cautious because the mood was a little bit different than usual, and approached her and asked her whether it was okay if I could photograph her this morning. I'd photographed her hundreds of times before and she loves it. She's always interested to see what I'll do. So I crouched down next to her. I had my 35mm lens on the camera and I shot a bunch of frames and turned the camera around to show her the back of the camera. And as she looked at the back of the camera, I realised that she hadn't seen herself without the neck rings on. That stage I didn't know that they'd only just taken them off about 10 or 15 minutes earlier. So as she was looking at the back of the camera, I was thinking, wow, here's another shot. So I quickly flipped the camera back around and squeezed a few more frames, and this was the shot that to me really made it. What's really important to me about this shot is the trust. She trusted me to take this photograph. I wasn't very far away from her. I had my 35mm lens on the camera, and it was quite a special moment. So be encouraged, if you want to photograph people, to build relationship with your subjects. If you're just starting out, if you're not sure, ask a friend or a family member if you can photograph them, and photograph them regularly. Build up a working relationship, a photographer-subject relationship, and you'll notice that your photographs will improve over time, and your subject will begin to trust you and become more relaxed, and this will also help you get better photographs of them. Or jump in the deep end, grab your camera and go down and shoot some street photos of strangers. This way you'll learn a whole different style of photography about photographing people and relating to people differently. That's a whole other lesson for later on. So there's 5 keys that I've shared with you today about creating good, strong images. It's about timing, about composition, about light, about exposure, and about your intuition, about your feeling for your photography. Trying to include all of these things in a single image is a great challenge. The more of them that you can squeeze into an image, the better the image is going to be. If you're interested to learn more about this topic, have a read of the article on our website. The link is in the comment section below. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got lots of great videos up there already, and there's more on the way.